We've been traveling around Australia for 3 months now, and during that time I recorded every transaction we made and every dollar we spent. That way we can keep track of how much it costs for 2 people to travel around Australia full time. So that's what I'll be showing you today. How much does van life cost on a weekly and a monthly basis? And what are the big costs that come up that you might not expect? But first, a quick intro. I'm Millie, this is Vanwick, and with my partner Jack, we've been traveling around Australia full time for the past 3 months. We've been fortunate enough to see a lot of this really amazing country and do loads of stuff, but we've been trying to do it as cheaply as possible because we want to maximize the time that we can travel. So in this video, I'll be sharing how much it costs, comparing that to rent, and then giving you some tips on how you can do that too. I won't be covering the setup costs and how much it costs us to convert a van. I do have another video on that I'll put here, wherever it goes. So if you're interested, go check that out. And that being said, let's get into it. So starting at the top, for 3 months of full-time travel for 2 people, we've spent 8,982 Australian dollars. I can see in my analytics that most of you are in the US, so for the sake of catering to an international audience, I'll be saying the numbers in US dollars and then putting the Australian conversion down the bottom. So in United States money, for 3 months, we spent $6,018, which is a smidge over $1,000 per person per month. So this includes literally everything: fuel, food, campsites, activities, ferrying the van to Tasmania, van repairs, everything. Don't worry, I'll get into all of the costs really shortly. But first I want to talk a little bit about our travel philosophy. So our philosophy has been to travel as cheaply as possible while still seeing and doing as much as possible and maintaining our sanity. So what that means in reality is that we cook 95% of our meals in the van with food that we buy cheaply from the supermarket. But the other 5% of the time, if we are tired as hell from a big day of exploring, we will eat out somewhere cheap to save us from setting up, cooking, cleaning, all of that stuff. Another example is we spent a slightly ridiculous amount of money taking the van on a ferry from mainland Australia to Tasmania because we really wanted to explore Tassie, but we did it at the cheapest time of day and then tried to free camp in Tassie as much as possible. So if you're doing this yourself, you could do it a little bit cheaper than we have, but I do think this is a pretty reasonable estimate of what you'd spend if you're doing van life in Australia on the cheap. So let's compare this to rent. The median rental price for a 2-bedroom unit in Sydney, which is where we lived before we took off on our lap of Australia, is 733 Australian dollars or 491 US. So let's just say $2,000 a month to make it simple. Since there are 2 of us, this is $1,000 per person, which is pretty much exactly what it costs us to live in a van on a monthly basis. So just rent in our old lives, not including bills, food, activities, anything, is the same as literally everything that we spend now that we live and travel in a van. That is honestly kind of crazy to me, but it also means that this lifestyle is accessible to a lot of people and not just people with loads of money. So I hope through this video I can inspire some people to get out there and give it a try themselves, because I've found so much happiness, joy, excitement, and adventure from living this lifestyle. Okay, so what did we spend the money on? By the way, there's no mattress in the bed because we've deep cleaned the van and we're airing it out. We've spent $6,018, which comes to roughly $1,000 per person per month. And this breaks down into 4 main categories. Category 1, which is our biggest expense, is food. In 3 months, we spent $2,256, which further breaks down into $1,671 on groceries and $565 eating out. Honestly, I was a little surprised with how much the eating out came to. Given that we aren't really eating out a lot, I guess this just goes to show that eating out a lot is really expensive, and I'm really glad that we did this exercise because we're definitely going to be eating out less in the future. For category 2, our next biggest spend over the past 3 months has been fuel. We've spent a total of $1,277 on fuel, which unfortunately, when you're traveling around Australia, is just kind of unavoidable. I've lived in Australia for most of my life, but until I did this trip, I just didn't have a sense of how friggin' big this country is And what that means is you need to spend a lot of fuel to get around it. Obviously it's worth it, but it's just a bit of a bigger expense than what I was expecting. Category 3 is our third biggest expense, which is fixed costs. In this category, we spent $746, and this covers insurance, phone plans, and Starlink. This is the stuff that basically we can't change the cost of unless we got rid of it. So we just kind of have to cop it. Although of the three things, I think Starlink is probably the most controversial around whether or not it's actually compulsory. For us it is, but I'll talk a little bit more about this later. And in the fourth and final category of big costs, we have accommodation. Now, this might be a little bit confusing because we live in a van, and so this is our accommodation. But a lot of places that we've traveled to, especially national parks, the only places that you're allowed to stay are campsites that you have to pay for. A couple of times we've also stayed in like caravan parks when we're either desperate for a shower or like want to do all of our washing in one go. But this is really rare. So the total costs for our campsites came to $513. Where possible, we'll obviously try to do the sneaky free camp. This has gotten so much harder in recent years. Basically everywhere that you'll want to camp, there's a no parking overnight or no camping sign. Having said that, we probably pay for camping only about once every 3 nights. So you do the math. There are a few other bigger expenses that don't really fit into any of the main categories, so I'll run you through them now. Number 1 is ferries. We took the van from mainland Australia to Tasmania, which is a 12-hour ferry journey, and it is not cheap. It cost us $746. We ended up spending an amazing 5 weeks in Tassie, so I don't regret this expense at all, but it definitely did eat up a lot of the budget. Next is national parks passes. For each state, you have to get a new pass, and we found that it's generally more economical to get a 90-day or an annual pass, as opposed to like a daily, weekly, or monthly pass. And in total, we spent $205 on parks passes. Then finally, the other big-ish expense that we had was van maintenance. We've spent $125 on that in total, which include things like extra coolant, extra oil, getting the oil changed, and buying new levelers so we can sleep on a flat surface at night. The rest of the money went to things like medication, toiletries, a few activities like visiting animal parks, or we went to a museum in Tassie, and a couple of other things we picked up along the way. So if you've got this far and you're wondering how we've managed to live and travel full-time for the same price as rent, the answer is pretty simple. You just do it. There is a lot of stuff that I used to spend money on that I just don't anymore. We don't buy anything new, like we don't buy new clothes. If there is anything we need, we'll try and buy it secondhand on Facebook Marketplace or from op shops. Like, my back was really hurting when we're driving, so I bought this little back support pillow for $1 from an op shop. In the city, we bought coffee once, sometimes twice a day. Now that's not an option, and we just make coffee with the AeroPress every day. Another example is that I used to love buying myself a little treat, like a lip balm or a little chocolate bar, every time I went to the supermarket. No, that is not allowed anymore. And sometimes we even kind of do gross stuff to save money. Like we put off a shower for a day or a few days until we get somewhere that has a free shower, so we can avoid like paying 20 bucks for a shower. This would have genuinely sent old me into a spiral, but we have been swimming pretty much every day, so it is what it is. To travel long term on the cheap like this, you need to just change your mindset to a mindset that prioritizes travel and the experience and basically just gets rid of everything else. Honestly, I've kind of surprised myself with how much I like this kind of lifestyle. Now that like material things just aren't an option for me anymore, I feel like a sense of freedom that I didn't necessarily have when I was living in the city. Okay, so now you've seen the budget and how we did it. You might be wondering if there's any way that you can do it even cheaper than we did. And the answer to that is of course yes. Here are a few things I would cut out if I was trying to do this super duper as cheap as possible. Okay, so number 1 is Starlink. Starlink is not cheap, but for us it's been super duper valuable, obviously so I can upload videos and we can stay in contact with friends and family, but also for safety. Especially traveling around Australia, the majority of the landmass doesn't actually have mobile reception. So if we get into a dodgy position, we always can put the dish out and call for help if we need to. And that gives me an extra sense of security, but it's definitely not 100% necessary. Number 2 is eating out. This, I think, going forward is somewhere that we are going to cut the budget. We do have a bit of a tendency to say, okay, we're really tired, let's just buy something out. But I think going forwards, we need to have some easier to grab meals that we can eat when we're absolutely cooked from a day of hiking or climbing. So we're not spending loads of money on eating out. Number 3 is itinerary. So as I've mentioned, we spent a lot of money heading to Tasmania. There was also other times that we spent money on ferries, like when we went to Bruny Island. And this added extra costs that we didn't necessarily have to spend. However, for me, the purpose of this trip is obviously to travel as long as we can, but not to penny pinch so much to the point that we miss out on activities and experiences that we really want to have. So for me, it was worth it, but this is something that you could cut out. And then the 4th place that I think you could save money is on activities. So we do as many free activities as possible. We hike pretty much every day, which is free. And we also do a lot of rock climbing, which is obviously free. Sometimes we come across like walks where you have to pay to do them, and we just don't do them because there are so many other amazing free options. There are a couple of times that we spend money on activities. These are usually wildlife or conservation parks. Generally, I'm pretty happy to spend money if it's going towards wildlife conservation, so that's not money that I regret, but you could definitely cut it out if you wanted to minimise the budget as much as possible. Honestly, I think we do a pretty good job of keeping the budget as low as possible, but if you have any ideas on where we can cut costs, please let me know in the comments. I love learning about how other people travel on the cheap. Okay, that is the end of the video. I really hope that this video inspires some people to get out on the road now that you know how cheaply it can be done. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.